common topic here on the Transformer Slag podcast that we talk a lot about is money here in our fandom. It's an expensive hobby. Collecting toys in general is not cheap. It has really shifted from the days of it being a kid's hobby and something that children would get once in a while to it being an adult hobby, and companies recognizing that and shifting the focus to that and getting that big boy money. And this whole conversation today spawned from the discussion of what's going to be happening with tariffs and the future of Transformer prices and their price points going into 2026. I know that just over the past 48 hours and the discussions that have been going on with Nintendo and the surprises at their prices, and forgetting the fact that a lot of the stuff is imported from overseas and other countries, and that has a lot to do with those final numbers too. Despite the fact that at the end of the day, I still think we're paying less than what we were paying for video games, penny for penny, when you factor in inflation 30 years ago. But regardless of the fact, that's a technological conversation. We'll get into that maybe in another time on a live stream. But when it comes to Transformers, price points have always had very dubious histories and reasoning behind it. Sometimes it was related to what was going on in the economic climate at the time. Sometimes it has to do with the success of the brand, and the money would shift depending on where that goes. And sometimes it has to do with the political stuff too. And I don't like to talk about politics on the podcast because I'm a Canadian and it's hockey puck, poutine, and maple syrup for me. But this is something that is going to probably affect us in the future. So I want to take a small little history lesson leading up to today of Transformers and their price points. And while Transformers kind of had price points between Generation 1 and G2, we didn't really get a standardized price point until Kenner really implicated it in 95-96 with that of Beast Wars. And it's kind of funny because we're coming up on the 30th anniversary now of price pointing within the Transformer world, and how a lot of stuff has changed, but a lot of stuff has also kind of stayed the same, especially the naming conventions. Think about the idea of a deluxe Transformer. Started all the way back really with Beast Wars. So let's get into it like we always do here on the Transformer Slag podcast, and keeping you educated, entertained, and informed. And I mean, it goes all the way back to 96 to 2000, the Beast era. We had the basic Scout at $5, the Deluxe at $10, the Mega Class, which would later on become a Voyager, but the Mega Class at $15, the Ultra Class at $20, the Super Class, which is what Optimal Optimus was, at $30, and we didn't have Supremes or anything crazy at that point just yet. And the following era, when we got into Beast Machines, Hasbro saw the good sales from Beast Wars, and also because there was a lot of translucent plastic being used with the basic scale and flak colors and metallics, I guess they felt, hey, let's up it $7. And by the way, when we're looking at our graph, if you're watching the visual on the screen here, when it's black, it means that it maintained its price. When it's red, it went up. And when it's green, in the rare case that does happen, it went down. And everything kind of stayed consistent. Going from 96 to 2000, but in the Beast Machines era, 2000, 2001, they just raised the price of the basic scale up to $7 from $5, $2. Okay, fine. Everything else kind of held. The Supreme class was invented at that point. That was Cheetor, and then it could kind of bleed into some other stuff too later on. But yeah, that was it. When we got into Robots in Disguise in 2001, 2002, that was the first and only time in Transformers history that a legitimate price decrease happened. We'll get into Star Convoy later, but that's a unique scenario. Basic scale sold very poorly. Beast Machines as a whole didn't sell very well. The blue card era, if you lived during it, as opposed to the red card era, blue card stuff and blue boxes being Beast Machines, red card and red boxes being Robots in Disguise. People wanted the RID, but they really wanted the red, as we used to call it back in the day on the message boards. So they actually decreased the price of the basic class back down to $5. And you had characters like Obsidian that existed in Beast Machines, but if you bought his Robots in Disguise counterpart, he was actually $2 less. And that was the only time in Transformers history that happened. Then we get into the Unicron Trilogy. Brian Goldner joins the company we end up in a situation where they're reevaluating everything for Transformers. It's a whole new era. Aaron Archer gets the keys, and we start the Unicron Trilogy in 2002, excuse me. And the basic price point is now turned into that Minicon 3-pack price point. So it does go up in price primarily because it changes from what it used to be. Deluxes are still $10, though that holds firm. The Mega / Voyager price point doesn't really exist at that point anymore. So it becomes the role play price point temporarily. And that's where you got like the laser beaks and the swords and stuff. The Ultra Class price point goes up $5, but that also has to do with the fact that Ultra Class and the Super Class, which would later on become leaders, would have a ton of lights and sounds and electronics. So there was almost a logical reasoning for the price increases, because at this point, with the exception of the Deluxe, really, everything was changing. Everything was going to be changing. Every price point was going to change what their goals were and what would be put into them. And lights and sounds would be a common thing for the next couple of years. When you go into Energon, of course, like again, we kind of phase out a little bit the Minicon price point. It does stick around a little bit in select ideas, but in general, now we have the Omnicons, we have the Terracons, so it's a different thing. A lot of translucent plastics, which again are more expensive, so it goes up to $7, a 50-cent increase, but still an increase nonetheless. And the only other thing that goes up is now we finally see the return of the Mega price point, and that goes up to $20 from the $15 originally, again, because there's so much translucence and everything popping off in there and everything. But everything else more or less kind of holds. The Ultras are still $25. The Super Scale is still $40, which would become leader later. And the Supreme Class, which is our Unicron, now in black, still holds at $50. Then we get to Cybertron. Everything holds the same, but we are included in this, the introduction of the Legend Scale. Hey, why don't we take some previously popular Transformer characters that normally are kept in an expensive price point, but why don't we put them in a small, affordable price point too? If you can't afford a leader Optimus, maybe we could give you this tiny one instead and some of those other big key characters. And so the Legend Scale was finally invented. Those were $3 each back in the day. And then we enter the movie era, because Cybertron went from 2005 to 2006. We enter the movie era in 2007. Nothing changes except that the basic price point that has been rocking for quite a few years gets nullified temporarily. That would become the Scout class later, but we'll get into that afterwards. And the Supreme price point takes a small little step back for a time being too. That also gets nullified. But Legend Scale goes up a little bit to $4, but otherwise everything else holds firm. And it's the same thing going into 2007 to 2009 with Revenge of the Fallen, animated universe from classics to Universe 2.0. That whole era still holds the prices. But during that time, the global recession happened. And when the recession happened, Hasbro had to really reevaluate things and make some of the money back that they obviously lost during that too. But there was also another thing going on, and I've talked about this before with the Beast Wars effect. Transformers was doing extremely well. Sales were through the roof in 2008 and 2009. So combined with the recession, on top of the fact that Transformers was selling well, Hasbro did their first ever price bump across all the price points without really changing anything in terms of like what is put into the product. When there was a big price jump during the Unicron Trilogy, things were changing. Electronics were being put in, price points were changing what they represented, but nothing really changed in this point except for the fact that the Ultra class now became kind of what is the Human Alliance, but everything else increased heavily. Legends went from 4 to 5. The Scout class was reintroduced and now made $8 from its original price of $7, so that went up a buck. Deluxe classes went from $10 to $13. The Mega price point was made from $20 to $22. The Ultra class, which would become Human Alliance, that one I won't rag on too much from going from 25 to 30, because at the end of the day, it was a new kind of concept, having the little minifig and stuff, so that's fine. Almost kind of like an alternator with a minifig. The Super, which then became the leader class, of course, went from 40 to 45, a $5 increase, and the Supreme class went from $50 to $75. And it rocked that for quite a bit. In 2015, we have a new era. Gone is Aaron Archer. You enter the John Warden era and new prices again. Ultra Class is completely nullified and taken out. Legend Scale is completely taken out. And we have now another price increase. So Legend Scale is kind of removed, but also rebranded. So the Legend Scale that we knew that were tiny were now kind of what the Scout class was today. And they just called that Legends now. And that was now called, Legends and not Scout. It was very weird how the wording was used. But at the end of the day, that was now $10 instead of $8. Deluxes went from $13 to $17. The Voyager class went from $22 to $25. The Leader class pretty much held strong. Same thing with the Supreme. And then we were also introduced to the Titan class, which started at $150. We jump forward 5 years, and now we're in 2020. And now we have the big V, and we have drama, and we have craziness and everything going on. And Hasbro increased prices then. And then it was, okay, like we're going to keep that Legend Scale for a little bit longer at 10, but now we're going to call it the Core class. And so it stayed at $10. Just now it's labeled the Core class. It's slightly smaller than what the Scouts were, more simple. But that's kind of how they kept it at $10 by shrinking it. And this is what's going to happen with the Supreme class later also. The Deluxe class went up from 17 to 23. The Voyager class went from 25 to 32. The Leader class went from 45 to 52. The Commander class price point was introduced at that point. It kind of, in a lot of ways, the Commander class price point was what a Supreme kind of was back then, but not really. So we're not going to call it too much of an increase, but it was $85 out of the gate when it was introduced to us. And then our Titan class went up $20. Now it was $170. And then during the big V, of course, we hit a terrible 2020 inflation reaction. And going into 2022, from the 2020 inflation, we had all these new prices across the board again with Legacy. And going into Legacy, it was kind of the same story. It's like, oh, hey, the Scout class, which is now called a Core class, that's going to be $12. The Deluxes are going to be $25, up $2. The Voyagers are going to be $35, up $3. The Leader classes are going to be $55, up $3. The Commander classes are going to be $90, up $5. And the Titan class is going to be $200, up $30. And that's what we were rocking for the past 3 years on the podcast, were these numbers here. These were the post-inflation 2020 numbers. And the only adjustment that happened to this was when we got Star Convoy recently, because the character was significantly shrunk down. The Titan class, while it didn't really have a price adjustment, it's more of a size adjustment. Titan classes were smaller, so they asked $150 for Star Convoy. And now we're here today. And it looks like with the tariffs and everything, we might be seeing some new prices going into 2026. And I want to give a shout out to many people that have discussed this, more specifically NecoBot77 on the message boards, who kind of really put a visual to it. And it's something where you have to ask yourself, like, this is what's probably going to be happening. And combined with the fact that Transformer product is assembled, it's engineered slightly in America, it's engineered and planned in Japan, it's assembled and manufactured in the plastic factories of Vietnam, then shipped over to Canada and the Longueuil packaging factories of Hasbro Canada, and it's packaged there, and then it's sent to America. Man, that's a tariff, fondue nightmare in a lot of ways. And it's something that when we look at the possibilities of the tariff increases, we're looking at our Deluxes that used to be 25 and then those becoming 36. Pretty much when you look at this readout, it's almost like every price point moves up one to the next price point. Deluxes now cost Voyagers. Voyagers now cost Leaders pretty much. Maybe, a couple of bucks. Leaders now cost, $10 less than what a Commander would be. But you get what I'm saying here when we look at these numbers. Deluxes at 36. Voyagers at 51. Leaders at 80. Commanders at 131. And Titan classes at 218. Now, granted, all of these numbers are not exact. They're obviously going to be moved up and down to make them much more streamlined when they become price points in the future. but it is something that gives you a general idea of what we could be looking at with the tariffs. And even what's even more scary when we think about it, if the tariff stuff does get dropped later on, I've seen what we've already talked about here today with the past prices. We went through inflations, we went through recessions, and those things went away, but prices stayed firm. And they become what are known as new normals. And muscle memory, unfortunately, with retail purchasers, tend to be very short-lived. People tend to forget very quickly what they used to pay before, and a new normal is put into their mind, and their muscle memory of their money goes away. So we're in the situation where it's a possibility in 2026 we're going to see deluxes at the price of a Voyager. So you're going to be paying like maybe, I'm imagining $34.99, $35.99 for a deluxe. I'm imagining something similar to that for a Voyager with the 51, maybe they'll do 49, but I can imagine there is going to be quite a few price increases here. And it opens a bigger discussion when it comes to Hasbro. And I know a lot of people have pointed out to me how Hasbro is one of those bigger companies that seems to really not understand pricing when it comes to products when compared to some of their other companies that they go up against, like Mattel and even Spin Master. But it's something where I do feel that we're going to have to probably get prepared for this. And like I've always said before, be smart with your money. You don't have to buy everything right away at full price. It's just how it is. The sad truth is that it's a big company that is always looking to post up profits for unfortunately, their investors, people who are not toy collectors. Don't call us investors. We buy your plastic, and yeah, it might be seen as an investment, but we're talking the stockholders and stuff like that really don't really care so much about the toy company and don't really have a loyalty to the toy company, more just Hasbro having to convince them to keep their stocks and keep their investments within the company and be shareholders. So they always have to show, hey, success, success, success. And one way to do that is increase prices. But in a world where prices are increasing, but the market is shrinking, less people are collecting toys, the newer generation are not so much interested in plastic representations of their fictional characters, it's going to be a weird one. And going into 2026, which is, again, kind of almost celebrating the 30th anniversary of price pointing for Transformers, they're going to have to figure something out. And is it going to be lowering the quality of the toys? Is it going to be, like fans call it waffling and stuff? I don't know what it is, but it is something where we're all going to have to really reevaluate a lot of things going into 2026. And there's a lot of cool stuff planned. Don't get me wrong. But it's also something where I hate seeing fans having money problems because they have to collect everything. Look, I go to TFCon multiple times a year, and I see tons of this product loose complete on tables for significantly less than what it is brand new. Sometimes you just got to be patient. You don't have to have everything from wave one right away. Sales happen all the time. Yes, it does hurt retailers that they have to buy stuff brand new and then it goes on sale, and then that's when you're going to cash in. But it's a symbiotic relationship. It's something where if you expect your customers to have to pay this insane amount of money for your product because you want to post up success every time, the people who are not loyal to your company, they'll pull those stocks and put it into Microsoft, then you might have to reevaluate your loyalties. And I'm not saying you, I'm saying the big companies, the Hasbros, the Mattels, the everything. It's a big, deeper discussion, but it is something I did want to address and bring to light here because there's a lot to think about going into 2026. There's a lot of cool stuff coming, like we talked about over the past couple of days. But I always say your wallet and your quality of life is way more important than you getting that latest Shockwave figure. So take a time to figure that out. And as always, thanks again for listening to the Transformer Slag podcast. And I hope you learned something today. I hope you people enjoyed a Transformer finance segment. I know these always do well with fans, but it is something I did want to address and talk about here on our Transformer Thursday. That would have been a pre-order day, but no pre-orders today. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you in the near future.